Grant reporting from Haiti brings us to 12 minutes to 7. The electricity grid is not the sexiest subject in the world, but it does need to be talked about, and tomorrow it will be when the ESO, the Electrical System Operator, brings out a report on what needs to be done to get offshore wind power into homes. Let's talk to Jake Rigg, who's the Corporate Affairs Director at the National Grid ESO. Good morning to you, Mr. Rigg.
Good morning, Justin.
Just a basic question, first of all. When we're talking about the grid and the ESO, what are we talking about? What is it?
So two slightly separate things. So the ESO, essentially the easiest way to envisage us is we are the people that run the control room for Britain's electricity system, keeping the lights on 24/7, every thousandth of a second, every day of the year. The grid itself, I guess, is a fairly catch-all term for all the electricity networks at different voltages up and down Britain, in Scotland, England and Wales.
Right. And what needs to be done to the grid?
So a whole heap of different things, but in particular tomorrow, what we're announcing is a £58 billion long-term plan taking us out to 2035 to connect enough offshore wind off the coastal waters of Britain so that we can decarbonise the electricity system by 2035. And on top of that, in doing that, make Scotland and the East Coast in particular leaders in floating offshore wind, green hydrogen, subsea cabling, all to connect all of that offshore wind up to the demand across Britain in the big industrial and urban centres, so that we can all continue to have reliable power but also decarbonise clean power.
Right, so when you talk about doing that, are we talking about the connections on land? In other words, more pylons or whatever it is on land, or are we talking about from the sea to the land, or indeed both?
So very much both. So what this plan will do is it'll connect all that offshore wind, bring it onto land, but also then moving it around GB so that we can get it to where the power is needed most. And typically, just to give a sense of order of magnitude of that, this plan has between 25 and 30 gigawatts of offshore wind off the coast of Scotland. Demand in Scotland, even in 2035, when it will go up, will be about 6 gigawatts. So way more power generated up there than necessarily will be entirely used in Scotland. So you've got to move that to where that's needed.
And how will that be done? Because that's where it gets controversial, isn't it? In Scotland, yeah. And particularly at the moment in Suffolk and Norfolk, isn't it? The idea that you have areas of outstanding beauty suddenly defaced, as many local people would see it, by pylons. Is there a way of avoiding that, or indeed is that what's being proposed?
So what we're trying to do in this plan is to minimise impacts on communities, really, really aware of the impacts on communities in Scotland and indeed in East Anglia in particular, as you've mentioned there. So what we're proposing is actually double the amount of cabling offshore to bring that further south. So 3,800 kilometres offshore. What I'm not going to promise is that anything that we can't deliver and say that there isn't going to be onshore cabling. There will be some onshore cabling.
And that is pylons?
Well, it can be pylons, it can be undergrounded at times, particularly in areas of outstanding natural beauty, which you mentioned. For example, it will be a range of different things, but yes, there would be some additional pylons.
And presumably, then the issue is cost, isn't it? I mean, you could put. When you think of HS2, you could put a lot of it underground if you wanted to spend the money. It is a kind of national choice, I suppose, in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I see it very much. There is a political decision there about how you want to do that and the impacts. Something that the transmission owners, so National Grid itself, SSE and Scottish Power would consult on, but there is ultimately a political choice about whether or not you underground it. It does increase costs quite significantly, potentially. So that's all been looked at in this plan, but we'll be looking at it along with the transmission owners in a huge amount more depth and detail to really try and minimise those impacts on communities and consult and work with different communities up and down Britain.
Jake Rigg, thank you very much for talking to us, Corporate Affairs Director at National Grid ESO, and that report is out tomorrow.